revolutionary Frantz Fanon in Conversations, because Fanon says that every generation has to find their mission in the ongoing struggle for liberation and fulfill it or betray it. And so we recognize that in the aftermath of slavery and in continuous colonial subjection, that we each have our part to play for the advancement of freedom, for the well-being of our community, for the reparations of wrongs that have taken place. And so we have to really thank the generations of community organizers, of activists, of educators, culture bearers, and people such as yourself who have taken an interest in our history and in our desire for freedom so that we could have the opportunity to come here today and to commemorate 1733 and those individuals who fought for our freedom and the ending of slavery in St. John, but also in the wider Caribbean. And so I'm grateful to our community and also to park officials and to our Congresswoman Plaskett as well as her team for really being responsive to our community's demands to see our histories adequately represented in park signage. And so for those of us, I'm going to just ask for a show of hands, how many of us are familiar with the history of 1733 prior to coming here today? And so I can appreciate that there seems to be somewhat of a generational awareness happening, that some of our elders have learned that history and some of our young people are here today to learn that history. And so for those of us who don't know, in 1733, the ancestors on St. John decided that they were going to make a really bold strike for freedom. And so in November of that year, they seized Fortsburg and they really established sovereignty on St. John for themselves for a period of what's approximately 9 months prior to our Danish colonizers calling in reinforcements to quell the uprising. But what's really beautiful about this history is that it's one of the first moves of its kind in the Western Hemisphere. And so it's really on St. John that we start to see some of those bold and beautiful pushes for freedom, for sovereignty, for resistance across the African diaspora. And that history is really important to us, especially because we are still a colony of the United States. And so we're still really grappling with what freedom means to us as a community and what role we're going to play in this ongoing struggle for liberation. And I want to speak to two things really quickly. The first being, I recognize that history is often somewhat contentious. Many of us were not there, literally or physically. And the archives themselves often have limits. It's usually people with privilege and power who get to create the historical record. And so we often find that there are disparate accounts about what has taken place or where it has taken place. And so in our popular narratives, we say that there was those individuals, the quote-unquote revolutionaries camping at Ram's Head, and that they may have committed suicide there in order to avoid being taken in as captured. And then we have some community records and accounts that say, well, that perhaps they camped there, but the suicide may have taken place at Browns Bay or at Mary's Point. And so I think it becomes important for us to honor that while we may not always have the exact facts, and while we are on this ongoing quest to discover more and more about our history, that what becomes really beautiful and important to us is the commemoration, the willingness to honor their legacy, not simply with signage, but with our day-to-day actions and our day-to-day activities. And so my question for all of us that I'll end with is, well, what do we do to advance freedom in our lives on a day-to-day basis? And how are we honoring the legacy that our ancestors at Ram's Head and the ancestors of the 1793 revolution have really carved for us. And I think that that's a responsibility that we each carry, and I look forward to us fulfilling our mission rather than betraying it. Thank you.
National Park on behalf of the Secretary of the Interior and the National Park Service. Today marks a special day that's been long coming. The National Park Service's mission is to preserve and protect and hold in trust the country's unique cultural and natural resources to be shared with the public. The people of St. John, since the establishment of Virgin Islands National Park in 1956, have had a complicated relationship with the park. Nationally, the National Park Service has not always fulfilled its duty to the people entirely or equally, but the agency is evolving, and so is Virgin Islands National Park. Recognizing and commemorating the enslaved Africans' Revolution of 1733 is a significant step for Virgin Islands National Park to fulfill its duty. The plaque that has been placed at Ramhead is part of this initiative and the first step with Virgin Islands National Park working with the community to tell the story of 1733.
Thank you so much. Next we'll have Senator at Large, Senator Angel Bolkas, Honorable Senator Bolkas. Please welcome.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Good morning. Start off by saying good morning to the young people. It's so great to have you all out here right now. It's very important. This is a part of your culture. It's VI history. And this is one of the movements like Dr. Sua mentioned, and also, thank you to the delegates for all of the work in the representation of our culture and our history in the United States of America, because we as Virgin Islanders have shaped our world in some way, shape, or form, in the sense of our people have went out into the United States of America, other parts of the world, and shared our society, our culture, our people, who we are, to the world. So we're a very important aspect to the United States of America as well. Now, there may be some issues that we have had concerning colonialism and so forth, but we're all here to work together. Unity builds strength. We know that we have had issues in the past, but we also have to learn from those issues and problems and work together. So young people, I want you to understand that no matter what happens, always try to be unified as one and collectively think positively. I want to thank everyone out here for coming out. I'm ready to go. I don't have much to say. I just got on my boots, ready to go, and I'm ready to walk and see how Ramshead looks. I haven't done it since I was about 26. So, so I'm 20 years older than that now, so I don't know. I'm going to see how my body responds, but I'm looking forward to a good hike. Thank you.
To where we are. In 2022, President Joe Biden signed into law a bill that I drafted called H.R. 7496, which stands for HR's House Resolution, right? Which directed the Secretary of the Interior to install a plaque at the peak of Ramhead in the U.S. Virgin Islands National Park on St. John to commemorate the 1733 rebellion. Up until now, there's been no public physical acknowledgement of what happened in the 18th century on St. John. And unlike elsewhere on the island, the Ramhead Trail contains very little to no signage about the historic significance of the location or the rich history of the ancestors who made that event happen. As we will see at the unveiling of the plaque, the memorial contains important facts about the slave rebellion, a mention of the notable collective suicide that occurred in the vicinity somewhere of Ramhead, and the overall significance of an island-wide rebellion to the history not just of St. John, not just to the Virgin Islands, not just to the United States, but to the entire African diaspora. The establishment of the Ramhead plaque represents a proper and meaningful acknowledgement of that history that occurred 115 years before the abolition of what is now the United States Virgin Islands, and 132 years before the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery everywhere in the United States. And how fitting that we stand here today at the beginning of Virgin Islands History Month, right? To acknowledge the incredible sacrifice made by our ancestors so we can live and prosper today. I want to thank my colleague, Congressman Guy Reschenthaler of Pennsylvania, who came to St. John on a trip, happened to do the hike at Ram's Head, and said, yes, I want to be the co-sponsor with you of this. This is important history. I think it's so important because right now, I'm getting a little emotional. There's such a drive to wipe out history in our country. And without our history and that truth, our children can't be strong. Even the children whose family may have exacted some of that violence, it's important for them to know that they are not that, and that we have moved beyond that. And so I'm grateful that we have black and brown and white and pink, whatever color you want to call yourself, people that are here who want to acknowledge and be a part of truth. History is truth. Africans and African diaspora is oral, and it's passed down by word of mouth, and some of it is lost. So it's important that we have scribes and scholars and those who can also make it in concrete, in steel, so that we know what that truth is. A year ago, I was asked by leader Hakeem Jeffries to be a part of a group of members, and that he said he wanted to take his first trip as leader of the Democrats to Ghana. That is the first place he wanted to set his foot as leader of the Democrats. And then we went on to Israel. But he said it was important for him as a black man to show that we have returned. And that we have returned in power, and we have in turn returned with intention from that point of no return, the door of no return that is in many of the slave castles in Ghana. And while we were there, we had a tour guide who was telling us the history. There's actually in one of the slave castles a plaque for the Akwamu individuals who were kings and queens and lost a war, lost a fight, and were imprisoned and enslaved and sent to the Virgin, that was then the Danish West Indies, because Ghana was, their slave ports were controlled by the Danes. And so I was thinking to myself, how remarkable that there is a plaque there that talks about the beginning of those people's journey to St. John, to be enslaved, having been kings and queens and royalty. And now we are about to, today, unveil a plaque to show that they still remained kings and queens and royalty even in their death.
Culture, water. I'm trying to
I conceptualized the symbolisms that already are freedom symbols in St. John and the U.S. Virgin Islands. We have the conch horn and the cane knives, which the Akwamu warriors and their enslaved counterparts used to take back this island. And the symbol on the bottom here is derived from the Andrinka symbol Aquafina, which represents courage, valor, and heroism, the cross swords of the Akan and Dinka symbols. And that's how we came up with this, with the concept for this plaque. It's done in bronze, so it should stand up to the saltwater breeze and be here for a very long time.
You could read it for the people in the back.
Sure, I can read it, and then I'm going to turn it over to Malachi for the blessing. In memory of the brave St. Jonian enslaved ancestors who, in 1733, organized the first major battles of resistance against the brutality of the European slave trade in the Americas. On November 23rd, 1773, Akwamu nobles, King Kanta, King Kaz, King Juni, and the legendary Queen Brefu successfully led an organized armed conflict against their European enslavers. The Akwamu of the Gold Coast, today known as Ghana, West Africa, along with other enslaved individuals, fought and controlled the Danish colony of St. John for almost 6 months before collaborative European forces managed to regain control. In the area of Ramhead, a number of the freedom fighters, rather than be returned to enslavement.
Mommy been around since we were in the bush, don't worry. She's okay. When I libate, I would like for the cooling water not just to cool the earth, which is actually the purpose of it, but to cool our minds. But still, the fire, that heat, that energy with which our ancestors acted, I want us to nourish it and nurture it within our hearts, and our tongues, and in our hands and on our feet, as we continue the work that they started, as we continue to fight for our liberation and our right to determine and to divine and to conjure our own destinies as individuals and as our people, right? For our freedom. And when I say freedom, I don't mean the freedom to think and behave as the oppressor, but the freedom to continue doing the work that we were doing pre-European interruption and occupation of our minds and of our bodies. That's why I want us to focus on that. I want us to keep that spirit of revolution. And I want us to use the knowledge and the wisdom that they gave us, continue to give us, to continue plotting and executing the revolutions of our day and of the future. Now, before I do the libation, I want us to just be really still and really silent and look south and think about what it is they were seeing. Imagine, not just as a people, but as individuals. When you go about your daily lives, are you living in the way that maybe they were reaching out towards? So in that spirit and thought is how I conduct this cooling of the earth. Omi tutu ile tutu ona tutu e tutu la roye e tutu egu. Mojuba olofin, mojuba olodumare, mojuba oru, mojuba irawo, mojuba oshupwa, mojuba igbaromoli ojuko tu, mojuba igbaromoli ojuko si, mojuba oduduwa, mojuba oramia, mojuba koda, mojuba sheda, mojuba yeye bobo yeye, mojuba baba bobo baba, mojuba ile, mojuba ara, mojuba ire, mojuba bobo oku oluwoyi alosha babalosha olosha babalawembe lese olodumari ibatorun. Mojuba bobo oku baba tobi mi eshubi. Mojuba bobo oku ayubonaka mi akweo lodu. Mojuba bobo oku nile pimienta y coral. Mojuba bobo oku tiolokumi. Mojuba bobo oku ti ilefe. Mojuba bobo oku laye. Mojuba bobo oku afosheshe mile nukoshe. Mojuba bobo oku emi oshundayo. Mojuba bobo oku arani. Virgin Islands. Kinka mashe baba tobi mi eshubi. Kinka mashe ayubona kamia kwe yo lodun. Kinka mashe oluo mi fatolo kun. Kinka mashe oba miki mafo. Kinka mashe obalade. Kinka mashe obinde omoyesa. Kinka mashe shango wale. Kinka mashe omitulu. Kinka mashe oshunainya. Kinka mashe adebi ocha. Kinka mashe oshun lokiki. Kinka mashe shulaye. Kinka mashe bobo iwora fashesha mile nukoshe. Kinka mashe mi oshundayo. Moju babobo egune mi oshundayo ni mo aki inlaro. Egungun kiki egungun iku ranfe awoko piro shube fun lewo egungun iku batabango egungun de. Bi aba fotorina le egungun na shede alele to le otiri ko johun kun lo parada odi mole a chegun. Kò sí ikú, kò sí àrùn, kò sí ẹjọ́, kò sí òfò, kò sí tìàtìà, kò sí fìdìbò, kò sí gbogbo ara yóò sopọ̀. Ìrẹ́ ikú, ìrẹ́ àláfíà, ìrẹ́ owó, ìrẹ́ ọmọ, ìrẹ́ ọmọ, ìrẹ́ ajé, ìrẹ́ ayọ̀, ìrẹ́ ìṣègùn, àríkú bàbá wa ṣe gbogbo èègùn mọ̀dúpẹ́ fún ní gbogbo ìrẹ́.
That's it. That's it.